I can't even believe I'm covering a story like this, but I thought it would be funny. Little did I know the rabbit hole of information I'd be led down. Let me just go ahead and rip those band in here and say we're gonna be talking about a man named Mansfield George Smith-Cumming, the MI6 chief that thought invisible ink was not practical anymore and was too detectable, and decided to use semen. According to him, it wouldn't fade or get detected under iodine fumes. I don't even know how they got an idea like this, but regardless, let's just go ahead and get this video started. Born in Lee Green, London on April 1st of 1859, he was given the birth name of Mansfield George Smith, and he would be the youngest into a fairly wealthy family of 5 brothers and 8 sisters. Can you imagine that? His father was Colonel John Thomas Smith of the Royal Engineers, and he designed a machine that basically printed the faces and the numbers on coins. And his mother was Maria Sarah Tyser, whose family was heavily involved in the shipping industry. At just the age of 12, Smith would pass the qualification examination into the Royal Navy and would go to the Britannica Royal Navy College in 1871. He would train at school for 7 years until 1877, where he would be assigned to the Bellerophon flagship. Then just a year later, he would be promoted to a sub-lieutenant, and his service would continue over the years, slowly climbing the ranks in the ladder, serving under different captains under different ships in different combats around the world. This would be until he got seasick, being put on a retired list, being deemed unfit for service in 1883. Romantically enough, 2 years later, he would marry his first wife, Dora Cloet, who would sadly pass away a couple years later in 1887. Then after another 2 years, he would marry his second wife, Leslie Marianne Valiant Cumming. And due to an agreement, he would change his name to Mansfield George Smith-Cumming. And since he was retired, the next couple of years of his life were relatively quiet. This would be until August 1st, 1898, when Smith-Cummings was appointed Boom Defense at Southampton. And he would work there for the next 11 years, being promoted to retired commander. And this is where stuff gets interesting, because in 1909, he would be appointed head of foreign sections in the Secret Service Bureau. And a little important side note of what this is pretty much the British CIA. You may have heard of MI5 or MI6 depending on where you live or your knowledge of history. But basically the Bureau would be separated in 2 categories. The MI5 being focused more on domestic threats in Britain, and the MI6 being focused more on foreign threats. Funny enough, this Bureau was just made being fairly new. It was mainly made because the British people thought that the Germans were spying on them in their homes. So the Prime Minister Herbert Asquith would order a new secret intelligence be made. And back to the story, it was questioned why Smith-Cummings was picked for this role, and it was mainly made because his experience, intelligence, and skills to gather information. For example, before even becoming a spy, he would pull off a mission as a German businessman in Germany gathering information. This mission would be successful, but here's the kicker. He did this all while not knowing a single word in German, which is honestly confusing and hilarious at the same time. Like, imagine just being that one guy in the corner like, hey, who's that guy? Like, you can't talk. You're gonna get caught. You can't talk. What do you do? But MI6 did start out a bit rough. Smith-Cummings was obsessed with finding German weapons in Britain and allegedly spent thousands just to find them. He ended up not finding anything because there were no weapons to begin with. Another instance of buffoonery is when their weapons expert had disappeared abroad for a couple of weeks, and they thought he got captured. In actuality, he got lost, and he just couldn't find a single person to give him directions in English. In fact, Smith-Cummings' only early accomplishment would be information on German Zeppelins. I didn't know that was a problem at the time, but I guess it was cool because the British government kind of liked the information, and it was deemed successful. The Hindenburg. What about the Hindenburg? Despite this, Smith-Cummings, now wanted to be called Seed or Cumming, would continue to hire part-time agents to spy on German shipping ports. I guess life was going great, everything was going cool. This would be until tragedy struck in the summer of 1914. This is when Cummings and his son were on holidays in France, speeding through the back roads when they got into a deadly crash. Now, Cummings' son would succumb to his injuries of blunt force trauma to the head. Cummings would only lose a leg, allegedly after cutting it off just to get to his son. Now get in a sad mood, because this is where shit gets freaky. Cummings was a master of espionage. It was reported that he liked to dress up just to be a better spy. But one of his earliest obsessions was with invisible ink. It's at around this time where lemon juice is used as invisible ink and is still highly detectable. And I don't know if this is because of him going crazy losing his son, or if this is just his normal shenanigans. But regardless, in 1915, Cummings would go to the London University and ask the scientists to make a new undetectable invisible ink. According to his diary though, his strange findings weren't because of the scientists. No, it was because of one of the agents who said, hey, you can use semen as invisible ink. I mean, like, how did he figure that out? Like, did he just get bored one day and just blast onto a paper? Yo, is this a kink? And the sad part is Cumming went with it. Like he went with it. He was even quoted as saying, now every man has his own stylo. This is painful, yet I'm too far in to stop. The agent who discovered this remains anonymous for obvious reasons, and was moved to a different department because of his bantering from his coworkers due to his finding. I mean, who fucking wouldn't? A rather awkward exchange of letters by Major Holm and Frank Stagg had Frank say a fresh operation was necessary for each letter. You can interpret that however you so please. It was reported that people working with Major Holm reported a stench. This is because Major Holm would stock up on his invisible ink. How do you do that? Why do you do that? I mean, imagine before every letter, you just have to let one off. Hold on, let me just. And that was honestly pretty much the highlight of Cummings' career. It was reported that his hiring process was a bit weird too. You know, you don't just find a random agent and say, you want to be part of a secret agency? No, he would test them. Okay, so let me tell you this. He would bring them into a room, brandish his knife, and then stab himself in his wooden leg. If they jumped, he would tell them to scram. If they didn't, they were hired. But prior to this, he was given the role of Chief of the Secret Service Bureau, which is the highest role you can get. Like, he controls MI5 and MI6, and he would serve the rest of his time doing what he did best, spy shenanigans. In 1919, he would be promoted to the rank captain on the retired list, and would also be promoted to Knight Commander of the most distinguished order. And he would live the rest of his life fairly happy until his sudden death on June 14th of 1923. That was the story of the MI6 chief who would use semen as invisible ink, a daring yet comical man who lived an interesting life. Ladies and gentlemen, we remember and honor this man by the name of Mansfield George Smith-Cumming. Thank you all so much for watching. You all have a good day and a good night. Peace.